Hello, Uganda. Good evening and welcome to the show On the Spot. My name is Patrick Kamara. Now, Uganda is currently under fire of stories, all happening at the same time differently. Besigye remanded till the 5th of January next year. Mpuga launching a new political coalition dubbed Democratic Alliance. This turn of events come at the cusp of the 2025 anticipated to be a campaign year, henceforth leaving a question. Is this a sign that we have hit the actual curve to the height of a political season? And how did the country reach this state? We sum up these events in democracy and politics through political analyst and Andrew Mwenda and General Mugisha Muntu, President, Alliance for National Transformation. Muntu, thank you so much for honoring our invitation. A warm welcome to you.
My pleasure.
Mr. Andrew Mwenda, CEO, Independent Magazine, old man of the clan. But why should I call you old man? Okay, old man of the clan, but I'm the head of the clan. Welcome to the show.
As the old man of the clan, I'm the chairman of the Elders Council of the clan, which appoints the head of the clan.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Patrick. It's been quite a while. I don't know why you have not been inviting me here.
Here you are. So I'm sure now you have marshaled a lot of energy and readiness to deliver without any disappointment.
Not at 112 years.
General Muntu, let me begin with you. The other day we traveled together to the Tanzanian town of Arusha and went to Butiama, and we saw this iconic figure who was being celebrated for what he did for Tanzania for maybe 3 decades when he was head, less than that. Tanzania seems to have probably solved their political question. We see the transition of power from one party, from one person to another, even though it's only Chama Pinduzi. Where we stand today, the doyen of opposition politics in Uganda is incarcerated. He's going to spend Christmas, the second Christmas in 19 years in Luzira prison, having been grabbed from Nairobi. What do you make of that?
Tanzania was lucky to have the late Mwalimu Julius Nyerere to become its first leader, and therefore shaped the direction of politics and built a firm foundation on the basis of which Tanzania is now able to solve its political economic problems. They still have some challenges themselves, like many countries do have on this continent, but at least built a culture where the majority of those who are in politics tend to look at Tanzania caring for the country, caring for people. While in other African countries, like here in Uganda, the majority of the leaders have always been driven by self-interest, over and above national interest. So we took a wrong direction right from the beginning. And therefore, the majority of people now who are in politics are there for self-aggrandizement, basically. So at the point when that a shift is done, and you find that there are more people who care about the country and people more than being driven by self-interest, then the direction of politics will change, not before then.
When you came to town in 1986 with a lot of goodwill, Ugandans welcoming you, we looked at you as heroes. Some of us were very young. Did you envision Yoweri Museveni that would still be president 40 years later?
There are things that we could detect in his character that would cause us to have some anxieties. But in 1996, when we wrote the Constitution and put their term limits, those anxieties ceased, maybe naively on our part. Because in my own estimation, I knew that all human beings can make mistakes. Even governments do make mistakes. But we knew that the moment we had a term limits provision built within the Constitution, that would be a safety valve. That even if there was a leader who was driven more by self-interest than national interest, that best case scenario, he or she could be voted out after one term. Worst case scenario, he serves 2 terms, he leaves, then another one comes in and they can carry out corrective actions. It was naive, at least on my part, not so much because I didn't think that Museveni could try something, or anybody, any leader for that matter, any human being, but that you could have 2/3. That's what literally almost knocked me off my feet. Because I knew that nobody could mobilize 2/3 of those. That's what I thought at that time. That there's nobody who could mobilize 2/3 of members of parliament, ordinarily who are supposed to be the cream of society. The best that the society has put out there. That anybody could manipulate them to amend that. It never occurred to me in my mind. I was only shocked when it sailed through in Chankwanzi in the National Council, and then it went to Parliament, and it was amended. That if there is any disappointment I've ever had in my life, it was that. Not so much in the individual. Individuals are vulnerable. All of us can be vulnerable. But that the very people, because if you're talking about Parliament at that time, we're talking about 400 people. That you could raise 2/3 out of that, to me, is what is more frightening than being disappointed in one human being when I know the vulnerability of human beings.
Do you have a conviction that perhaps President Yoweri Museveni is serving a personal interest, but innocently thinking he's serving a nation?
One, well, human beings have got different inclinations in terms of management styles. And one of the biggest challenges he has is a micromanager. Now, micromanagers are similar, whether it is in the political field, whether it is in the economic field, or wherever you find them. It's rooted in their psyche. Unless one does psychoanalysis of a person, that's the only time you can pinpoint exactly where it comes from. Because micromanagers, by nature, lack confidence. They lack confidence to delegate power. And therefore, they're incapable of building systems or establishing institutions because they think they are the only ones who can do anything. That's a sign of lack of confidence. Because when you delegate, there are those who do quite well. Now, micromanagers are terrified to think that there is anybody who can be as good as them or even better.
Okay.
So there's a problem in that regard.
Let me turn to the old man of the clan. Andrew, you've had a front row position, a vantage position to understand Ugandan politics, to understand the regional politics. With us in Uganda, from your own perspective, really, from the front row, and I've seen you very close to President Museveni, President Kagame and others, what is it that we lack, we don't get right, to put our politics right, to serve this country, service delivery to be okay? What is it that you see is missing from our leaders today?
Well, for me, Uganda actually is a very big puzzle to me, in the sense that if you go into the rule book, for example, or the textbook elements of a democratic polity, for example, Uganda would be far ahead of Rwanda, whether in terms of democratic expression, in terms of political participation, in terms of political contestation. Here we have elections where Museveni seriously faces threats of being defeated. He has to employ a lot of violence to crack down on his opponents. You have a diverse and loud media, civil society organizations, and highly active and vocal political parties. So all the classic elements of pillars, what they call pillars of restraint in a democracy, are much more developed in Uganda, for example, than Rwanda. But when you go to Rwanda and see the dedication of the leadership and the government to serving the ordinary citizen is much more cultivated than Uganda. Uganda's parliament is elected, members of parliament are directly elected by people. In Rwanda, they're elected from a party list. You know, you don't in Rwanda as an MP go contest a constituency. No. The parties contest, and then parties allocate seats. And here, in fact, you find that the interesting thing is that the attrition rate of Ugandan MPs and local government officials is very high. Right now, we have a parliament of 529 members. Only 105 were in the last parliament. So you have an attrition rate of 75%. So therefore, the question therefore is, from the perspective of institutional design, Uganda government, given the level of political contestation and the attrition rate of people's representatives should be much more responsive to the needs of its citizens. Yet our country's leaders, leave even Museveni as an individual, go to parliament or local governments, they are largely driven by the desire to serve their pecuniary rather than the national interest. And you should ask yourself why. The other day I was in Rwanda. They recently changed the time for reporting to government offices from 8 a.m. to 9. You know why? Because they want parents to be able to first drop kids to school. Yes. But remember that Rwanda is 1 hour behind Uganda. But we are still in the same late time. So when it is 6 a.m., the level of lighting in Uganda is the same as Rwanda. So for them, at 5 a.m., it's bright. So you can go to school. Me, sometimes I leave my home at 6 a.m. to come to town to avoid traffic. I find little kids of 6, 7 walking to school at such a strange hour. But why do Uganda's elected representatives, whether in Kampala City Council, in our parliament, in all other layers of government, why are they not responsive to the needs of their citizens? Look at how Kampala is one continuous garbage dump. This is the most contested area in Uganda. Why is there no government responsiveness to the quality of roads, pedestrian sidewalks, street lighting? You know, most Ugandans actually, I run on Kampala streets in the night at 6 a.m. Most Ugandans actually walk to work. They can't afford transport. But you don't have pedestrian sidewalks. Those that exist have manholes. There are no street lights for people to walk. So, and those are the majority of people who vote. Up to now, I have never understood. Now, I can theorize that if you introduce the kind of textbook democratic politics in a context of a very poor society, you are likely to entrench clientelistic politics rather than people-centered politics.
So what is it that can cause a spark so that we have a vibrancy in the Ugandan populace? So we have a higher citizenry engagement, civic competence is high, then they cannot just take any other,
But that's
so
what
as to
I'm
avoid
saying.
what in Tori may know, what they call Bichabyambuzi. So that whatever rope you bring, the goat will just accept. That's what we have become.
The point I am making is that, in fact, in terms of political engagement, civic activism in Uganda is much, much high. It's very high, that's why...
Yeah, but that civic activism is higher during elections. So, it should be constant throughout so that people demand what is theirs.
I think it's actually constant throughout. You can go on social media, look at Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or
And then why do we allow
TikTok.
mediocrity?
So perhaps we should ask, why is it that in spite of these high levels of civic activism, and high turnover of income MPs, our politics is dysfunctional and does not serve the public good? That is what we need to ask ourselves.
General Muntu, could you attempt to answer that?
Well, the regime has deliberately, cautiously, and systematically done things to completely disempower people.
But,
How?
now, Andrew is saying with examples that we are a very vibrant society. So, civic competence is high. The attrition rate of members of parliament is at 75. People are engaging.
Human beings are highly vulnerable. Many of them are prone to being broken down. If you put enough resources and time and effort, we've seen it even happen in countries that seem to be more developed. Look at Europe, when those countries before the Second World War. How, for example, Hitler, how he turned around Germany. Even now they ask themselves, how could they go in that direction behind Hitler? The Italians under Mussolini. Human beings can be vulnerable.
With Americans under Trump.
So here, the regime deliberately has designed to cripple people through fear, through compromising them, because instead of building their strength, they keep focusing on where they are weak in terms of vulnerability to incentives, giving them money, positions, and they basically target leaders. When you target leaders and you break them down systematically, consistently, you create a state of hopelessness in a society. It is like if you go, like now we are seated here in conference center, and you look at the main pillars that make this conference center stand, and you compromise those pillars, this edifice can collapse. That's why, unfortunately, much as leaders do that, most of the autocratic leaders do that, they forget to recognize that if you keep doing it over a prolonged period of time and you break down the pillars that are leaders in a society, you can lead that society to a collapse. We have seen societies which collapse. We pray to God that we don't collapse. You know, and that's why, Andrew, much as we see leaders who collapse, the effort to maintain, to maintain hope, that effort in people, even where one leader falls, another one to emerge, is such a critical factor for the survival of our society. Andrew, there's nothing that is as dangerous to find a society which has lost hope of a future.
In this discussion, Andrew, I want to be drawing from your experience because of what you've been able to see where to go and your own ingenuity. There's a point, there's a time I remember you're able literally to sit two people together, the President of Rwanda, Kagame and Yoweri Museveni. At one point, I think they even gave each other cows and stuff like that. From where you sit, are these individuals who strike you as a people, leaders who are really dedicated to serve their countries, or probably now they're even captured by their own power?
Well, let me put this like this. I am not a person who really takes individual leaders that seriously, even though there are special cases where individual leaders really, really, really matter. I always try to look at the broad perspectives of that drive a site in a particular direction. I have suspicions about the kind of institutional design of Western democracy and how it performs in Africa or in a poor country. Because you see, in the Western world, we are disadvantaged. For them, they democratize it as a result of development. Right? They first industrialized, those societies first transformed from being agricultural to industrial, from being rural to being urban, from being illiterate to being largely literate. Once they had gone through that process of structural transformation, then the social forces produced by structural transformation, a large educated middle class, a vibrant civil society, a large laboring class with labor unions, all these pillars became the foundation on which liberal democracy was built. But for us, when we are still 70% peasant society, less educated,
we are taken too fast to something.
Yes, no, we accepted these systems. Now, I'll give you an example of India. The Carnegie Endowment in 2016 did a study of elections of India's political system, and India, I think, is the longest surviving democracy in a poor country. Since 1947, they have sustained democracy across a long time, and it's the largest democracy in the world. So the study by the Carnegie Endowment is titled "Where Crime Pays." So they show in their study that in every election, the share of criminals being elected to the parliament of India increases by 2%.
Criminals?
Criminals. In the 2012 or 2012 elections or 2011 elections, they had elections before that study, they said out of 2,100 members of people who contested for 680 parliamentary seats in India, 700, which is 30%, 33%, one-third, had a criminal record on them, had criminal charges on them. This is 2,100 candidates in a parliament of 680. Isn't that the
surprisingly, more or less the same size with us, though they are 1.4 billion.
Yes, yes, yes. So that is one. One-third of the candidates had a criminal record. Of those one-third, 168 of elected MPs were facing criminal charges. 33 were elected from jail. Just imagine that. So the study is a perspective on how, and they conclude by saying that countries like Norway and others, you know, for them they first built institutions, then democracy was state institutions, civic institutions. Democracy came and was placed on top of these institutions. They said that the problem of India is that democracy was introduced first before institutions of restraint. These pillars of restraint had already been cultivated and nurtured. So what happens is that it becomes a criminal enterprise. But if you study what is happening in India, you'll be surprised if you go to Kenya, where there are high levels of democratic contestation. I mean, like President Ruto the other day literally bought off 3/4 of parliament to impeach his deputy. You go to Zambia, find the same thing. I think Ghana went bankrupt in 2022 and is one of the most advanced democracies because the sitting government, in order to win elections, went on a borrowing spree and now failed to pay its debts and declared bankruptcy. So in all these poor countries where there are high levels of democratic contestation, the quality of leaders goes on declining. And the example of Uganda is very good. Before 1996, when we entered competitive elections, I would say that the quality of parliament, the parliamentarians being elected, would you agree, Greg? They had a high share of members of parliament were really public-spirited individuals. But the more we entrenched elections, the more public-spirited individuals started withdrawing from politics, and crooks and ruffians started joining. Today, and one of the reasons why it was possible for Museveni to amend the constitution, remove term limits, and then remove age limits, is because the share of parliamentarians who are not public-spirited but who are into these narco politics and of personal gain has been increasing rapidly. And I wonder whether if we sustain this level, so even if you remove Museveni, I don't think that you would change the nature of leadership because someone.
What will it take for this country to have some kind of a turning point? Service delivery is poor. We have a huge debt problem, and yet Ugandans seem to be okay moving on like that. What is it that you think can be the catalyst that could change this country? Because I can imagine the economy is not in our hands, not the banking system, the telecom industry, the insurance, and all these things, including even, I think, even the hotels like where we are. What do we own?
So I think that we as Ugandans, to have a conversation on what kind of decisions can we have that can facilitate public-spirited individuals and put them at the center of our politics. Because right now, the way it is, for me to win an election, I need a lot of money. How do I raise money? We don't have business organizations, civic associations like labor unions, cooperatives, and others, which can raise money and fund candidates to represent their interest. So I, Andrew Mwenda, I have to go and sell my house, which is depleting my savings, or borrow money from a bank to go and run an election. So, but if I do that, I must expect to recoup my investment when I'm in parliament. So I must lobby either to be a minister if I'm from the ruling party in order to loot the state, or to sit on a powerful, influential oversight committee of parliament if I'm a backbencher or an opposition.
But sometimes you can deploy in more money than what you can recoup.
Hold a second. But of course, every investment can lead to a loss or a profit. Some profit, others make losses. Most Ugandan MPs make losses. But let me demonstrate to you. So I must sit on an oversight committee of parliament where I can extort bribes from accounting officers of government institutions, agencies and departments, ministries, MDGs, they call them?
MDS.
MDCs.
Ministries, departments and agencies.
And agencies, MDS, yes, exactly. So I must therefore leverage my oversight role on a parliamentary committee to extort bribes from accounting officers of MDS who appear before me. So essentially, the very creation of an institution of parliamentary oversight committees is compromised by the nature of the elections, not to hold them to account, but to leverage that position to get money. The minister to leverage this position to make money. So the very democratic system we have, however much you may love and kiss it and embrace it and cuddle it, actually produces dysfunctional politics. So you can change Museveni and put Andrew Mwenda. Or you can put there, I think General Muntu is a very noble person, and I think if we get him into government, either we'd have to adapt to the system or we fail. But the system is designed for wheeler dealers. So how, therefore, the question should be, how do we structure our institutions to limit that kind of behavior? For me, that's the most important question.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing is that all that is by design. That's the most saddening thing. Because if General Museveni is someone who had believed in the building of institutions and systems that could become a foundation on the basis of which this country could be propelled forward, first, he wouldn't have tampered with the constitution.
But also, too, how does the removal of term limits change that kind of politics?
You know, motivations in human beings are very, very critical. Because even all these examples you are talking about, whether it's countries that have been democratic or even those countries that have not been necessarily democratic, those that have succeeded would have been headed by leaders and teams that they worked with who cared more about the advancement of the country than advancement of self-interest. You can say that Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore. Singapore was not necessarily democratic when they started. They really were quite, used strong arm tactics. in building the foundation on the basis of which Singapore has prospered. General
Pak Chung-hee.
Chok Pang-hee.
Pak
Chung-hee. Chung-hee of South Korea. I mean, it was a dictatorship. A dictatorship, but built a foundation, and the focus was how do we develop South Korea. Democracy has evolved. As you notice, about 5 years ago or so, they had a serving prime minister who was taken to court and successfully prosecuted.
No, a president.
So there's a problem.
In fact, the daughter of Pak Chung-hee,
yes,
Park Gwen,
yes,
she was the president of that former president who built the country, and she was in office. They impeached her and even took her to jail.
Yes. Now you can see this president, the current president, who declared martial law,
Yes.
and Parliament has resisted him. I have not been following.
When we look at Uganda, 1961-62, when Ugandans were angry when the colonials were here, they worked hard and Muzungu had to go.
Yes.
And in 1980, when you guys were angry, you went to the bush and you were vibrant and you sacrificed, and in 1986 you came to town. What's wrong, Andrew? What's wrong with this generation? There's no that kind of anger that can change the nation.
But also in those cases, whether it was 62, the consensus was on removing what they did not desire. 79 was to remove what they did not desire. Same thing subsequent when we went the bush. It looks like while we were talking about changing the country, but it looks like the consensus was removing the UPC government. So unfortunately, we've not had the opportunity, and we still have to keep working for that, so that there are people who are not looking at just removing a government, but are looking on how to advance a country, so that in the process they remove a government, but that's not an end state.
Okay, Andrew, it appears every generation had men and women of substance who could stand up to fight for a cause that of a national interest. 62, 79, 1981. But what do you think is wrong with today?
I don't know whether, but you see, that's what I've been saying, that maybe the system we have is not... first, I come from a different school of thought from Greg. I believe that individuals, yes, individual leaders and political organizations do play a role, but their contribution to the transformation of society is really marginal. And you need to look at the structural forces driving a particular process. I'll give an example. South Korea as a country faced an existential threat from North Korea. And they knew that they had to build a very strong and powerful economy to resist North Korea.
Adapt or die.
If you look at Taiwan, let me give you a simple example. Taiwan. When Chiang Kai-shek was ruler of China, the whole of China, the ruling part of China at that time was called the KMT, the Gumidang, or Komitang, however you pronounce it. Actually, he presided over largely a predatory state. But when he was defeated by the communists, led by Chairman Mao, and he ran, like you defeat Museveni, he runs Cesar Islands and creates a country there. He ran to Taiwan, and Mao could not cross the straits to attack because there's 100 kilometers of water. 100 miles, nautical miles, yes, of water. And he's a general, and like me, I'm also a general. To move soldiers across large bodies of water is a very difficult enterprise. That's why Hitler could not attack England in 1940 after he defeated them in France. So he stopped. But when the KMT went to Taiwan, what had been a predatory state on mainland China became a developmental state.
In Taiwan? In
Taiwan. And many scholars have asked, what transformed? The same man, Chiang Kai-shek, continued ruling. His ministers went with him. But they say that when he left in China, the KMT was held hostage by the coalition of landlords and warlords, landlords, guy who owned land. That was its support base. And warlords, they had created, like Museveni has have these Moses Salis and others, they held the Gumidang hostage and was unable to exercise an effective power effectively. But when they went on the island, they were always afraid that Mao would come and attack them. And two, the vested interests had been left on the mainland and they were destroyed by Mao on the other side, by the communists. So this side, they were free to mount relatively unified action around development, first for self-preservation on the island as an independent entity, hoping to attack China and maybe recapture power there. But when that failed, to become a successful country, because obstacles were not there. So sometimes I wonder, When Museveni comes to power here, he's in the bush, he enters an alliance with the interests, very conservative traditional interests at Mengon land. That's why Museveni has failed to carry out effective land reform. You cannot transform an agrarian society without land reform. Two, he enters an alliance. When he comes to power, he gets foreign aid, so he enters an alliance with multinational capital. Multinational capital cannot transform your country. You need to build a national bourgeoisie class, a national business class. Then he has churches to appease. He has peasants' egos to massage. I mean, the kind of compromises has make it difficult for him to pursue a project of transformation. Now, when you look at Rwanda, I think that the genocide destroyed existing centers of power, whether it was the church, traditional collectivities, the mass media, and all these, which left RPF actually free to pursue
an agenda,
its agenda of development without generating significant secondary contestations from other mobilized forces within society. But also, of course, you cannot rule out the fact that at a personal level, Kagame has a much more tenacious character and determination to get what he wants. But Museveni is much more compromising. Museveni is very passionate in his pursuit of power.
That could also be because of the people he leads.
But flexible in his morals. He is passionate in his pursuit of power, but I find him flexible in his morals. He's willing to compromise his principles in order to retain his power.
So as hung to power.
Yes.
That's the way the problem is.
Yes.
Leadership is a critical factor in the change of direction of nations. You don't rule it out. It's the critical factor.
Now, talking about leadership,
I consider it to be the smaller factor.
No.
So, General Muntu, the elephant in the room right now, I think that is bothering. I hope this is not sub judice, but so long as we're not discussing the merits and the merits of a court case. If you are a commander of the army, or maybe a commander-in-chief, and you have a political opponent you suspect to be going a subversive way in another country, how would you handle something like that?
You gather evidence.
What do you make?
And you cause his or her arrest when you have got sufficient evidence to know that you can successfully prosecute them in the courts of law.
What do you make of the manner in which Dr. Besigye was arrested in Nairobi and brought to Uganda? And the Kenyans involved?
Of course, there are many unknowns. But when I look at it from where I stand, it seems to me that, as I've indicated before, that those who are managing this operation are either inept, or they are very reckless, or at the subconscious level, people who are in the government, those who are in the regime, they may not know it. But it seems at their subconscious level, they have reached a point where they think they no longer have any image to protect. Because if it's not any of those three, I can't understand how anybody would go and abduct a senior political leader in another country when that leader was not in exile. Because they knew Dr. Besigye was coming back here. They know that he's been going out and coming back. Now, considering the consequences of such a short action, you can imagine what they call the law of unintended consequences. So I can't decipher whoever was managing this operation, how on earth they would do that.
But I thought the reason...
Two, if he's arrested, anybody arrested outside the country, more so in a country like Kenya, which is a neighboring country, and they have got standing protocols through which a person can be extradited. Why panic? You abduct him, you sneak him across the border, you take him to a military court. That already undermines, even if someone was involved in anything, that completely undermines even any investigation that you would have conducted. So I basically can't understand whoever was behind this operation, what was going on in their minds.
Andrew, do you think the Kenyan government is trying to play safe, to save image, other than saying, yes, we're in cahoots in this operation, because that would make them look very ugly? But
I don't know whether they were involved, but from my own information, the Ugandan intelligence operatives who carried out this sting operation wanted to arrest Besigye directly in the act of discussing or negotiating for arms with a view either to carry out treason or assassination or whatever it is. They wanted to catch him in the act and record videos and audios. That was the first challenge they faced. So they had to lure him into some place, record him and arrest him in the middle of the act. The second thing they discussed, from what I hear, is if we arrest him as Ugandans, if we inform Kenyan police, they may not allow. And if they allow, they may have to take him to a Kenyan prison, from there to a Kenyan court, and then we have to apply for extradition. Now, Kenya is a highly litigious country. They litigate a lot. It's like the United States or Uganda, these countries that are addicted to court things. And it would become a very big battle, and maybe they may fail. So if you have to catch him in the act, then it is better we don't involve the Kenyans. We kidnap him, put him in a vehicle, and take him out. And then he appears in Uganda. So I think that was the reasoning. From what I discussed with the people in security, that was the reasoning, that let us not allow the Kenyan judicial system to bog us down in many litigations. The Americans may intervene, and other human rights.
You seem to suggest that the Ugandan security operatives were so smooth and so slick that they could just sneak into Kenya, get their man, and get out, without the knowledge of the Kenyan military, of the Kenyan.
It is possible they could have negotiated with some of their friends in Kenya and asked them, "You turn a blind eye." Yes, you turn a blind eye to our mission. It's very possible, because I think that Ruto has very close relations with Museveni, and I hear that Museveni played a central role in his victory by funding and mobilizing different components of Kenyan power structure to get him through. And he seems to owe Museveni a big favor. So it's possible they could have talked certain elements within the intelligence to turn a blind eye to this operation so that it succeeds.
General Muntu, you're once army commander of this of the Ugandan army.
I highlight out that when I visited Dr. Chizabeja and Haji Obed Kamreg, one of the things I was interested in our talk was to find out how they crossed the border. So I asked them, I said, when you reach the border, did they take you through Panya? They said no, they crossed them through the official border.
Did they stamp your passports and stuff?
The operatives took the documents. Of course, they went to the offices, they remained in the vehicle, and then the vehicle that they had been brought in, which was Kenyan registration, once it crossed, they transferred them into Ugandan vehicles. The other vehicles went back. There's no way an operation can be carried out through the official borders, and you think that they want high-level officials, at least in the security services of the other country. Because if it was a rogue operation from the Ugandan side and the Kenyans weren't involved, then they would have to use Panya routes. And there are many across the border. I mean, people smuggle all the time. So it was a shabby operation.
Why do you say it was shabby then?
Come again?
Why do you say it was shabby?
Look, you put a neighboring country in a mess in which they are. Now there is a problem in Kenya. They are questioning the Kenyan officials what happened. The image on Kenya itself. I saw, I don't know whether he's an official, a public servant within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who was trying to explain this issue. And he was like speaking Greek. You could see that he didn't know what to say.
but that's not a first, Andrew. These kind of cases have happened in Kenya before. Some, I think a Pakistani national, a Turkish, and others have been picked in Nairobi by countries just come in and pick their people and go.
But
you see, the image of a country gets, really very damaged. But the question is, like in this, because most of those cases, people would have been exiled. Some were refugees, I think. In this case, there is a political leader who is not in exile, who has visited Kenya for launch of a book, and he's coming back. So the intelligence, if you have any intelligence operation you are running, you must design it in such a way that when you gather evidence outside, even if when you know that it is sufficient to a level where you can successfully prosecute, you can arrest the person within the country. Or you can conduct that operation even within the country. Because a state has resources.
This is why Andrew is talking about getting him in action, catching him in action, negotiating for guns and all that kind of stuff. And that was going only to happen in Kenya, India.
I don't know who was conducting this operation. If it's not just, we will wait. We'll wait see and how this whole thing evolves.
Okay.
But I think the levels of ineptness are frightening. The levels of recklessness
the
in doing that
was probably set up to more or less instill discipline in the army, and probably you know better. Is Dr. Besigye likely to get justice in a court-martial or military court-martial? And now, considering President Yoweri Museveni has written to Uganda and the Bazukuru saying this is good for Uganda, it is for stabilizing Uganda, and is saying people should not have a problem with it. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that I don't think a person like Besigye can get justice in a military court-martial for the simple reason that Museveni controls the court-martial, and it's likely to deliver the decision the president wants rather than the decision the members of the court-martial themselves think. I have some sympathies with Museveni on issues of the issues he raises in his letter today.
And why is that?
Well, because I also think that sometimes our legal system may be too theoretical. I personally know that there are so many people who steal phones in Kampala, parts of cars, they get arrested, they go to Luzera, 2 days, they give them bail, they're back on the streets, stealing again. Just you imagine, leave the politics. And therefore, you have a large community of phone thieves, of thieves of car parts, side mirrors, and all this, who are roaming the city every day, attacking and stealing, because they know they will get bail. And two, you have more than 100,000 cases.
Incarcerate an innocent man.
This is what I'm saying, that you have 100,000 cases which are backlogged in court because you don't have enough. We have unlimited capacity to appoint RDCs. I've never understood why this country cannot appoint more judges to clear these courts of these backlog cases, because remember that the justice delayed is justice denied. So, but this is a political issue. But the criminal issue is that this country needs to find a... This is what I'm saying. I have sometimes sympathy with Museveni complaining that we have too many criminals. He may exploit this problem, which is legitimate, for his political ends, right? But I think that generally we should not dismiss his point. That's why I have avoided these cases he brings of terrorism. I want to bring these issues of where the ordinary citizen of Uganda, he's mugged on the street, his phone stolen, and it's happening every single day. How does he get protected? Because the thief has been given bail 6 times. And bail in Uganda is a right. And the case is in court forever because cases don't get finished. So there is that aspect. Now, of course, Museveni may exploit it to keep Besigye out of the way and inconvenience him. I don't even think that the government of Uganda has ever had an intention to prosecute these political crimes to a successful end. I think they are used to intimidate, to inconvenience, not to intimidate the person like Besigye, because Besigye is used to it, but to send a signal to others that this is the evil that will be visited upon you if you challenge us. So many people will not want to be in Besigye's shoes, always going to jail, so they avoid opposition politics and go and do other things. So the aim of this prosecution is really not prosecution, but signaling. Okay. Don't dare.
General Monto, you are former army commander. I can imagine probably this was set up in your time as well. The court-martial. What was the aim of the court-martial? How was it supposed to happen? Because I thought this should have been a disciplinary sort of committee to deal with the military discipline matters.
The letter which General Museveni has written in support of the trial of civilians in military courts. We all need to know that all countries have got provisions, not all countries, but a significant number of countries have got provisions in their constitutions that allow for extraordinary measures to be done when there are extraordinary situations. For example, when there is a total breakdown of systems because of maybe insurgency or in whatever circumstances, for there to be a declaration of a state of emergency. You can declare a state of emergency in an area like Karamoja, because he quoted Karamoja, specifically to deal with that situation. And the president is given powers with cabinet to declare a state of emergency, I think for about 3 or 6 months. Beyond that, it is Parliament that can extend it. That's how stable countries should be. So that there are institutions, one to take care of a country. In case of emergencies, they look for ways of how they can protect a country. But it is institutionalized and it's also temporary. Now the problem here, we are not in war, there is no insurgency, then why on earth take civilians in military courts? You've had time to build the judiciary, the justice, law and order sector. So much money has been pushed into that. And then you have to get your political opponent and throw him in a military court. It means that therefore you don't have sufficient evidence.
General Muntu and Andrew Mwenda, gentlemen, hold on to your points because we're going to take a break on the spot. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching On the Spot. My name is Patrick Kamara. My guest this evening, I have General Mugisha Muntu and Mr. Andrew Mwenda. Andrew, today the president issued wrote a letter to the country and the Bazukuru. And on the issue of the court martial, he's saying, in case you think it's not proper, maybe we go the referendum way. What do you make of that, on that very matter?
Maybe because he thinks he can win.
But is it proper to go for a referendum on a matter like that?
Well, I don't think that it would be appropriate to use a referendum to take away people's rights. You cannot call a referendum to say whether Uganda should have only Christianity or Islam as a religion. Because what faith they choose cannot be subject to the decision of others. Equally, I don't think that you can say we're going to referendum to decide whether Uganda should not give justice to its citizens. You get what I mean? I simply think that there should be circumstances in which court martials can play a role, and those should be defined by law, and when they cannot. Of course, we have a problem that the states, like in Uganda now, they don't use these, as I said earlier in the previous segment, they don't choose these prosecutions with a view to prosecute them to the end. No, it is to create inconvenience, to soil a person's name, to really, and also to signal others who may be trying to challenge the government that this is the evil that will be visited on you. You always understand that the political leaders will have intentions different from what you are seeing on paper.
But General Muntu, we have always held the view that of all the public institutions in Uganda, the UPDF is at least an institution that has a pulse, that is still some kind of a vanguard of excellency. Are they losing that shine? Because really, the military has been exceptional, in my view, than other institutions.
Yeah, but it's gone through a lot of trials and a lot of stress. Because when you have leaders who make wrong political decisions, and then they use the army in the execution of those wrong decisions, it can be quite stressful on the institution itself. And eventually it even starts contaminating the thinking of the officers and men in the force. That's where the problem is. One hopes that by the time any other political party that takes power inherits the force, that it will still be holding together. And then it can create an environment in which it can be reformed, in which it can be professionalized, because there are many officers and men who really care about the country. Unfortunately, politics being what it is, there's no way they're going to stick out their heads within the military as we speak to try to cause a shift in terms of the political direction of the country. That's a challenge for those of us who are in politics. And that's why people who want to see change towards a better direction have to keep working day and night, because those officers and men themselves are in a hostage situation. Clearly, you see.
Andrew, I say this very cautiously. What is happening to Besigye, in a way, is also breathing energy into his politics. Isn't it likely to give an added oomph that he was losing?
By the way, I should tell you, Patrick, I have always failed to get the handle, to understand the handle of what we would call the chain of causation. I've never known You see, if I look at correlations, each time Museveni employs high-handedness and violence against his opponents, voter turnout increases, the share of the vote of the opposition goes up, and that of Museveni goes down. And each time he's civil and doesn't behave badly, voter turnout goes down, and the share of the opposition goes down. I'll give you an example. In 2006, Museveni was quite violent towards Besigye after he returned from jail, arrested him, charged him with rape, terrorism, and all this. Besigye was front page news and headlines on radio and television, and I felt it was great marketing for him. So although it was inconveniencing to Besigye, it gave him a lot of free publicity because you're on the front page of newspapers. At that time, there was no social media, and on headlines on TV and radio. And then from that, you become the talk of town, in the markets, in offices, in villages, in gardens. Everywhere people are talking about you, and for a candidate, top of mind awareness is very important. So voter turnout was 69%, Besigye got 36%, Museveni got 58%. In 2011, actually, Museveni decided not to use violence. It was the most peaceful election in 2011. Besigye was not touched, there was no arrest, there was no prosecution, there were no beatings and killings and all this. Voter turnout fell to 58%, Museveni jumped to 68%, Besigye fell to 26%. In 2016, Museveni went back on a beating and violence spree. Besigye's publicity went up, voter turnout went back to 68, Besigye jumped from 26 to 36, Museveni fell from 68 to 58. So, when I look at such statistics, I get the sense that whenever Museveni employs violence against his opponents, he actually mobilizes the country against him, exactly what you are saying, which many people decide to show up and vote against him. So it works against his interest. But then you have to ask yourself, why then does Museveni work against his interest? Which means I may be getting the chain of causation wrong. It may be that Museveni employs violence in an election when he feels the wave or the momentum is against him. So what causes the violence? Is it the sense that the sense that the momentum is against me, or does his violence cause the momentum? I don't know which is cause and which is effect. I've never understood that. It's quite a challenge. But another thing...
He panics.
Panic, yeah.
But
because he knows the effect of momentum. When
so you think momentum is what causes the violence?
Oh yes, because the moment he sees the crowds building up, he knows if they don't intervene and scatter them,
as
they can
as
overwhelm
possible.
him.
So
because that's what happens all the time. I mean, like I remember in 2006, momentum started building up in Arua. Then we went down to Masindi, then Hoima, then Rukunji. That's when we were coming back. That's when Dr. Besigye was arrested. Simply to scatter, because they knew if they didn't do something, that momentum could build all over the country. So they wanted to nip it in the bud. That's what happened even
but then to also accelerated
in 2021.
Yes, but that is accelerated Besigye's country.
But it's in the process, the system creates fear, and they ride on that to ensure that they create conditions in which they can rig the election itself.
But then how come the fear they create, Ugandans tend to respond by going out to vote against Museveni? That's, okay, statistically, more people show up to vote and a higher share of votes go to the opposition, which looks to me self-defeating as well. Anyway, I think that I have an issue, of course, personally with Besigye, because I am inclined to believe that the recordings of him colluding in treason or in violent overthrow of the government are authentic. And I have this disagreement with Besigye, you have had it since 2001. Me, I believe that we must sustain the civic struggle for expanding democratic space. That we don't...
So you actually believe that the audio that you heard is authentic?
I have sufficient evidence, yes, to believe that it is authentic.
No, I don't.
There's a lot of debate around that.
Sorry?
There is a lot of debate around that, because I've seen clips of people being shown to sing songs when they are not even singers. I've seen clips of people, using AI.
Why would a man who has been engaged in this kind of civil, contestation for leadership for 20 years now resort to these means, and then they just catch you with a pistol and 8 bullets?
So I will tell you two things.
And you want to take on a country and actually play a game that President Yoweri Museveni knows best.
The issue of AI really should even be seen outside the particular case that we're talking about. I think we need to understand from the experts to what extent AI can be used to
So
a point
can I answer you,
to be used
Greg?
to the extent that there are no technical means of proving whether it is AI or not.
think there is.
Because that's the
Actually-
critical
actually,
thing. That's the most
Actually, there
critical
is technical
thing.
means.
Actually, there are technical ways to
Yes.
establish whether a particular video is AI generated or not. When I received these audios, that same day I sent them to a friend of mine at Microsoft and another friend of mine at Apple. Can you test for me two things that were important in that? Is this an AI generated conversation? That is one. Two, test for me. If it's not AI, is this an edited conversation? Because I can pitch conversations of you
Yes.
from different times and different places and add them together to create a coherent narrative.
Yes,
that
when you have a big data.
and they replied to me saying in both cases, one, it was not AI, two, it's not a continuous conversation. That's why I'm saying I have sufficient confidence in the authenticity of these these audios. Yeah, the second thing is, I think that Besigye committed himself deeply to removing Museveni to the degree that Besigye, along the way, lost sight of what he's fighting for. This became a life and death struggle between him and Museveni, because I have a feeling that Museveni is determined to cling to power by all means and at all costs. Besigye is determined to remove Museveni from power by all means and at all costs. So the country is caught between these two very extreme positions. What has been disappointing for me as a Ugandan who occupies an independent space to try to find ways to expand democratic space is that third parties, or a third force that is both moderate and is not driven by personal ambition but the good of the country, has failed to gain traction between these two extremes. General Muti is a good example. I consider him to be a very noble person. I don't know why Ugandans are not attracted to him, but attracted to either Besigye or Museveni or Bobi Wine, people who come and take very extreme positions. Because Besigye, when he went to the exile in 2001, he was, remember, banned from going on radio in Uganda. I'm the only person on Andrew Mandela who used to host him. But I used to host him because I went to President Museveni and argued with him. I said, it's better for you to allow him to appear on radio, and then I can invite Mayomba or Tinyefuza, other people to challenge him. Then we can have a debate. Otherwise, if he's out there gagging him, you don't also have your voice heard.
I remember.
First, hold a second, Patrick. So, me and Besigye spent a lot of time on phone. I used to call him to tell him he was committed to an armed struggle. And I was telling him, you and Museveni came to power by armed struggle. It has not worked. Why? Because whoever wins a military victory, if he's politically challenged, what stops you from going to use the same means that brought you to power, to protect the same power? So we must sustain the civic struggle for expanding democratic space. Again, I used to argue with Besigye, and he's my witness, because I called him, would speak for hours on the phone. I say, right now, your threats, and he was making them on my radio show, of an armed struggle, creates two risks. One is your own immediate supporters in the reform agenda. Now Museveni can pick them up, because Museveni is a specialist in violence. And he always, whenever he feels politically threatened, he resorts to military means. So your own supporters in the reform agenda will become victims of state terror because of your call for violence. But two, the wider struggle for democratic freedom in Uganda is compromised, because then those who struggle against Museveni, he may associate them with you and have them arrested. So we must sustain this other one. When he came back, he seemed to change because he embraced ready to walk to work. But even in a protest, I developed disagreements with him. I felt Besigye was protesting for the right to protest. Protest became an end in itself, because if you go to protest, there must be ends you are seeking. And those ends cannot be achieved only through protest, because once you are protested on the street, it's important to go and negotiate with those in power. If you're protesting inflation, what do you want the government to do about inflation? It cannot end just on the street. But maybe go to Ministry of Finance or State House and negotiate how to handle inflation. So every protest must end somewhere. But I feel like Besigye, like Museveni, confuses his pursuit of power for the pursuit of Ugandan democracy. Museveni confuses or diffuses his pursuit of power with the pursuit of the development of Uganda. He thinks, he does not see the distinction. Besigye, the other side, sees his struggle against Museveni. He does not distinguish his personal struggle to remove Museveni from power from the wider interests of creating a democratically free and economically prosperous Uganda.
You see, one is the cause of the other.
You know what Andrew Mwenda doesn't, what Andrew Mwenda doesn't tell you. What Andrew doesn't tell you.
Yes.
I actually was in the same studio when Andrew Mwenda is hosting Dr. Besigye online from South Africa. And I remember hosting a military officer, he's now deceased, and he was asking him that he built a coherent story of how Besigye was transferring arms from Rwanda through Kasese, through Fort Poto and Gulu, and then joining somebody called Opoka and to Kony. A military officer.
Mayombo.
Okay.
You got Chief of Military Intelligence.
Chief of Military Intelligence. But in the break, Andrew asked, "You mean you have all this information? You mean you have been having this?" And the man said, "I made it up."
That's not true. That's not true. It is me. During the break, I said, Mayombo,
yes.
The story seemed to be so authentic
yes.
that it kept me as a lie. Because Mayombo would say, on the 5th of January, you called your agent Taine in London on telephone number 000-4479, like that.
Yes.
Then on this day, you appeared in Dubai. You booked yourself in Jumeirah Hotel, room number 485, and then you called so and so. The coherence of it was so, like, they had a tab on Besigye that was so tight. And me knowing Mayombo and how sophisticated he was, I felt that he had cooked up this story. Of course, Mayombo in the studio insisted it was an authentic story, but me, I felt that he had cooked up this thing, because if you're chief of military intelligence, you're on radio, people are listening, they're likely to believe you against Besigye.
You know, I heard you asking about why people choose to take extremist positions. When a sitting government closes all avenues or possibilities of people taking power through democratic means, it creates extreme reactions.
I agree.
Clearly.
I agree.
So when you see people who believe that nothing else can work other than either street actions or taking up weapons, it's just because of General Museveni's actions of closing avenues of
General Muntu,
changing power.
Earlier, General, you are the biggest advocate of individual leadership.
Yes.
One of the examples I take is, for example, both Martin Luther King, Kwame Nkrumah, and Nelson Mandela. When Mandela actually seeks talks, he's the one who sought talks from jail with the South African government in 1983, it had reached the pinnacle of its violence against black South Africans. Scores of them, or hundreds of them, were being thrown in jail, and for him, the more violent it got, the more he felt that this government is vulnerable. Maybe we need to talk. Now, in the book Playing the Enemy, on which they based this movie Invictus, they said that Mandela called the team with the Kathrada, Giovanni Mbeki, and Walter Sulu and others, there were 9, and said, guys, we need to talk to these guys. These people said, no, we can't talk. But it's only Walter Sulu who told him, he said, look, me, I don't agree with us talking to them because of what they are doing. But you are our leader. If you are convinced, I will agree with you to go ahead. And Mandela went with only one vote of Mbeki and decided to talk. So I felt he played the role of moderating his supporters. In 2001, I worked with 2011, I worked closely, 2011, 2012, I worked closely with Conrad Nkutu, who was very close to Besigye, to arrange negotiations between Museveni and the FDC. I felt I was the go-between Besigye and the Museveni. I would talk to Museveni, Nkutu would talk to Besigye. Actually, Besigye gave us 7 conditions, which I took to Museveni. Museveni accepted all of them, and I felt Museveni's acceptance of them was very important to begin talks. It's very difficult to know. Museveni has entered many talks and many agreements and not respected them. But you can never know the outcome of a particular process unless you go through it. So it's better to try and fail than fail to try.
This is also very reluctant to talk to Museveni, by the way.
Yes, but I'm going to explain to you, that's why I disagreed with him. Again, I felt he could not put his credibility online the way Mandela did.
Conditions were different.
Okay, conditions are different, but let me tell you, unless we get opposition leaders who are willing to engage Museveni in any discussion, then we have one alternative. If you cannot see the other side as opponents to defeat, and you see them as enemies to destroy, you cannot have a democratic system. If you say I cannot talk to the other side, you see, democracy requires that me and you, whether we are Conservative and Labour Party in the Parliament of Britain, engage each other in an intellectual discussion. If Because I think the opposition also play into Museveni's hands. Anyone who talks to Museveni, he has bribed them. So the accusation of bribery hangs like the sword of Damocles on our necks. And that is why I reject it. I depend on my integrity. Anytime Museveni invites me to his house for dinner, I'll go and eat his food. I'll go and meet and talk to him. And if he does something right, I will defend it, even with my life. If he does something, I will oppose it, even with my life. I have many causes for which I'm willing to die. I don't have any cause for which I'm willing to kill for.
I feel the spirit of Mandela.
Yes, but I have a very strong disagreement with Uganda's opposition that we are going to struggle. And democratically, a democratic system requires that however much I may disagree with Museveni, I should be able to talk to him. If you say we cannot talk to him, then how will let democracy work? How do we engage in negotiation and compromise? Another thing, if you go with things to negotiate, you must be able to give and take. The more you are willing to compromise, you have to sacrifice certain things that are dear to you, and the other side has to do the same in order for you to gain something, and they also to gain something. And we have to create that atmosphere. If we don't have it, I can tell you can say kwaheri to any experiment in the democratic system.
So which I think which is also true. If you look at Kenya, the Kenyans can one day lie here and they go the other side because they're able to compromise. In Uganda, we are enemies poker last.
It's also leverage. Most times, you know, when you are sitting across the table and negotiating, whether it's political, whether it is economic, there must be leverage on both sides. The other person knows that if they do this, this other person may do that. So the only time when you can sit across a table, if you don't have leverage and you trust that you can achieve something out of a negotiation, is if you read goodwill on the other side. But if there is no goodwill, you have no leverage, you are walking into a lion's den, you'll just be eaten up. So the only thing that you have to do is continue building leverage. And when you have reached a point where you are satisfied that now you can contend, then you can engage. I think the biggest challenge I notice on this continent, and maybe in Uganda, we don't spend a lot of time and resources and effort in building what eventually gives you that leverage. So that even the other side knows that if they don't engage, they have a lot to lose.
But you know, General Muntu, in fact, I'm inclined to believe that even when we have had leverage, we have thrown it away. In 2011, because of walk to work, Museveni had been pressed into a corner. He was much more open to a discussion, after which, when it failed, he was able to use salami tactics. You know, salami is this meat that is cut into small slices. You see, Museveni realized that, okay, if I cannot have a opposition in one, I can begin pulling one by one. I can keep slicing them and weaken them more. When Besigye was at his strongest, and Museveni was willing to give much, the conversation did not take place. I should tell you, in those negotiations we had with Museveni, really, I was impressed by Museveni's willingness to have conversations, because Besigye demanded that there should be an international mediator. So we went and talked to President Mkapa, former President Mkapa of Tanzania, who offered, he was in retirement, to preside. Both Museveni and Besigye agreed to him. Then we discussed that there should be an international guarantor. We went to the Carter Center in Atlanta, and the Carter Center and the former US President Jimmy Carter was willing to provide guarantees to what we have discussed. Then the Besigye had demanded that the discussions should not be limited to political parties. There should be members of the press, there should be civic organizations, leaders of the church. Museveni accepted it. Do you see? So there are many elements that had been built in the structure. I can go back to my notes of 2011, which Besigye had given me. And you see that at that time, the way it was structured, maybe Museveni would have scuttled it. Maybe he would have turned it into
buying time.
A fast Mobutu had did in Congo. We don't know. But ultimately, the fact that we never tried, we can never know what would have come out.
You know, he was buying time, and when the pressure ceased, he disengaged.
No, Besigye pulled out.
No.
He's talking about Andrew. He's talking about,
because I was in FDC.
So
yes.
And I know that whole process.
Andrew, what do you make about the electorate in Uganda? When in the election where you participated, you'd ask almost everybody, whom do you think on this ballot would make a better president? Believe you me, everybody asks to say General Muntu to be the best. Yeah, but are you going? Let me tell you. I just want Andrews. I'm telling you, this is what I would hear. Every person I asked, this is the guy. This is the best person to take us forward. But then they are reluctant to vote for him.
Because people have lost trust. They have lost trust in the electoral process. To the methods we apply, people think they can't work here. That's where the problem lies. That's why most people think that you can either take this country through street actions, civil disobedience to build momentum and overwhelm the regime, or through military confrontation. And to me, I simply understand where people are coming from. One, they've been plunged into a state of frustration. But sad enough, many of the leaders themselves have not been able to do analysis to recognize that actually you can overwhelm this regime through an electoral process. It may not be sudden, but you must build towards that. Look at Kenya. You keep talking about Kenya. See the outcomes. Normally, what happens? Here we focus a lot on the presidential. We never focus on the ground. What gives the opposition momentum and leverage in Kenya is normally even when the opposition does not take power. Look at parliament. Look at the, what do they call them, provinces? What do they call them? These regional...
Counties.
Counties.
And the government.
Look at the senates. You almost find 49-51. It is so close that if the government does not tread carefully, opposition can paralyze the country.
By the way...
But look here. Even the highest, which Dr. Besigye got, was 38, even when the electoral process was 40, I think there's a time when it was 38. Was that the highest?
Yes.
Even when the presidential was manipulated. Recently, Honorable Bobby Wine got 36. All those, if you use 40 as maybe the point of the opposition vote for those who wanted change. But look down. We have 2,000 sub-counties. 40% of that is 800 sub-counties. We have 146 LC5 chairpersons, or districts, 146 districts. 40% of that would be around 60. So you can imagine the vote which the opposition gets, much as the presidential is manipulated, and you take 800 LC3 chairpersons, and you take 60 districts. And then you are disciplined, you are focused, you use the resources in those districts. If you have got 60 districts, you get like 30 or 40, you concentrate and ensure that there is good delivery of services. You ensure that you stamp out corruption, that young men and women can leave universities, go get a job without paying a bribe. So you create a different picture. At the sub-county level, if out of 800 sub-counties, you have got 500, 600 that have been successful, then you build that. People recognize that there is certainly a difference between this group and that group. You can shift the country in the next round. But you see, if you go up and you are cheated at the presidential, and at because combined opposition, we've never got beyond 200, even at the highest, 200 sub-counties. Nor have we ever got more than 15 districts. So you fail to capture the ground. Even when there's a significant number of people who actually desire change, you have to organize. If you want to overwhelm a regime like this through an electoral process. The worst thing in life is to let your mind tell you, however dark any situation is, that this is an impossible route to lead you to victory. Whatever engagement you are in, you can't afford to let your mind say this is an impossible situation.
Okay.
Look, if in warfare, when you look at the concentration of fire, artillery, aircraft, bombing, bullets whizzing, and yet people survive. And victories are won. How can you tell me that it is impossible to organize and overwhelm a regime, even where it starts with the mind? And unfortunately, we fall in the trap where General Museveni does all manner of things that he does to psychologically influence people to reach that conclusion. So for those of us who are in the opposition who want change, and we fall into that trap, we become our own impediment.
Okay.
Look, recently, 2021, how did Uganda shift? In less than 6 months,
Okay.
Honorable Bobi beat General Museveni in Busoga at the presidential level.
I actually asked Honorable Bobi Wine.
But go down, look at LC3, look at LC5. Where did they go? They went to the movement.
I asked Honorable Kyagulanyi on whether he was not concerned that they could steal his vote. And he answered that he's not concerned because he was planning to overwhelm the system. And he said it very well in Uganda. Baba akataweze. If you give more than 90%, 80%, even if you want to steal that vote, probably you find it very difficult. And I believed him. So he overwhelmed the system in Uganda and he carried the day.
But I want to supplement General Muntu point. I think that what Muntu is raising is a question of strategy. Absolutely. I should tell you that from a strategic point of view, let me begin with his field of specialty, the military. In the military, they teach you that if you have to attack an enemy, you must attack him at his weakest point. What I have never understood, especially about Besigye, because he's a soldier, is why do you attack Museveni at his strongest? Because the presidency is where he has put his highest volume of resources, he has fortified that position. And yet to weaken him, I feel, I need to attack where he is less committed. LC1, LC2, LC3, LC5. Am I correct? If I can, and then Parliament, if I can invest most of my resources, not in capturing the presidency because I'm hitting myself against the steel wall, but I invest heavily in the parliamentary seats, in LC5, in LC3. Let me not even go into fighting corruption and creating government there, but you can, once you get even 40% of parliament, then you can, he can't change the constitution to remove age limits or term limits. You'd have to force him to stage a coup. If you have district candidates on the lowest level, it even increases your chances of protecting your vote. Am I correct?
If you organize on the ground.
Yes. But you see, organization on the ground comes from the fact that you have strong candidates. Because you see, strong candidates at the local level also have an interest. They have relatives, friends, partners on the ground. So the best way to build effective organizational infrastructure at the grassroots is to have strong candidates. So all the resources of FDC or anti or whichever party it is need to be deployed in parliamentary seats. You can even look here. I have always felt you can even. Yes,
approach.
I agree with him.
But people have refused to buy into that.
But you see, people are interested in capturing power. Let me tell you, the problem of Uganda.
You have to build.
Museveni's opponents
bottom up
are mirror images of Museveni. As I told you, Museveni's opponents, the mainstream ones, are his mirror images. They're interested in capturing power for the sake of that power. I don't think they're interested in building the institutional foundations of managing a society effectively. What he's talking about. I don't think. That is why they hurl themselves at the presidency and leave their flanks, which is parliament and local councils, exposed. And from a military perspective, Museveni is able to employ what he calls Zuruhon to encircle them.
Okay.
Because their flanks are not protected.
I want us to conclude on another issue. There seems to be a new kid on the block in Uganda now. Bobi Wine did something great. He created a momentum, and there was a wave that captured most of the seats here. But his former leader of opposition, I understand, is launching what he's calling a new democratic alliance. Do you think, Andrew, it will gain traction or it will just fizzle out? I'm talking about Honorable Mpuga.
I don't think
he seems to be now in a collusion course politically with his former boss.
First of all, Mpuga's party will be dead on arrival. My own suspicion. I hope that the history proves me wrong, or subsequent events prove me wrong. One, because he has left parliament when he's heavily compromised. There is in the air the smell that he was compromised by Museveni, compromised by corruption deals in the parliament and stuff like that. The strongest base of the opposition, those with the greatest fanatical enthusiasm, support the opposition, see him as a traitor. So his party will be dead on arrival precisely because the way he quit Noop was shrouded in accusations of him being involved with the government in corruption, getting these packs at the those retirement benefits the speaker was paying him. So I don't think that he will gain traction in Buganda. Whether those allegations are true or the suspicions or whatever are true or not is irrelevant. What is relevant is the public perception is that. The second thing that, of course, NUP itself has become a non-starter in the sense that Bobby Wine lacks the kind of tenacity to sustain the momentum of opposition politics, but he also, I don't think, knows how to run an opposition political organization. Where is he?
Who?
Bobby Wine.
He's heading in.
Somewhere in Magere.
But you see, I should tell you, I have enormous respect for Museveni as a political mobilizer. When Museveni was in the bush, Museveni was leading a left-wing neo-Marxist organization, right? But he went and quoted Rule, who was the representative of Uganda conservatism. He quoted the Uganda business class, the Kigongos, the Sam Malays. Then he quoted the most conservative of all institutions, the Catholic Church. Then he quoted another conservative institution, Mengo. Because he knew that to win over a society, you need to craft yourself, to ally yourself with the powerful social institutions through which people express and identify themselves. Institutions like the Catholic Church, Mengo, Uganda business class, Muslim groups. Museveni allied with them. Museveni reached out to Lule, whom he had kicked out of power. Now, let me ask, how much does Bobby Wine do? Not just to rally his base, but to reach out to others who are undecided, to those who disagree with him, and try to create a broad coalition of those Ugandans who are frustrated with Museveni and are looking for a new direction. He has failed to become that leader. So he will remain a leader of the zealots. He will continue to preach the converted, but he can rally the base, but I don't think he can broaden it.
I told the Honorable Mpuga when he joined NUP that my suspicion was that he's not joining NUP because he's ideologically convinced. But at that time he had seen NUP as a special purpose vehicle that can take him to Parliament. It's on record. He abused me. He was said, "What are you talking about?" And I am there. I'm convinced. But do you really think those people, with all respect, were convinced ideologically, or they were just riding on the web? And at one point, they were going to disintegrate. The
guys who joined NUP from DP,
no, especially the echelons of Honorable Mpuga now who was moved.
Yes, I think that most of the DP MPs who joined NUP did so out of strategic calculation. That this was a new kid on the block, a new party on the block that was attracting Uganda support. And they flocked into it out of what I would call opportunistic reasons. But I don't think they even believe in the leadership of all those MPs of Buganda who joined. They don't even believe in the leadership of Bobby Wine, which is normal because how many Republicans believe in the leadership of Donald Trump? They disagree with him, but they realize he has the Republican wave on his side, so they are strategic opportunists who craft themselves on him, which is, I would consider, normal politics. Those of us who are not in politics, we despise such things, but that's why we are not in power.
I see it from a different perspective. One, NUP is a young party. They were hardly a year before they engaged in the election of 2021. They got 57 seats. By virtue of the 57 seats they got, they are able to get significant amounts of resources. I think they should be getting about 3-point-something billion Uganda shillings a year. So the moment they concentrate resources in terms of time and in training and direct the leaders who came in at that time, because it was like a wave, and shape the thinking and build common objectives and ideas that they can mobilize around, and then try to consolidate the areas that they have already taken, and then work on expansion. Don't dismiss them. Don't dismiss them. They have got opportunity on their side.
All right, gentlemen.
And in regard to the group of leaders who have separated with the NUP, I get a sense that the error they are committing, and my hope is that they really have to shift direction from that, is to seem to focus on in an offensive against NUP. They have to forget about NUP or any other opposition party and focus on attacking the regime, because it's the regime that we want to remove. And then sell themselves around the strategy, around objectives, and whatever message they have, so that they can build around that. Because see, for any opposition party to fight against another opposition party creates problems for all of us.
All right, gentlemen.
Undermines the trust of the population in us as opposition, and therefore they have to move away from that strategy. Because if they continue with that strategy, it will become very problematic for them to build themselves into a credible force. Okay,
Andrew and gentlemen, to Andrew, what's going to be your parting shot tonight?
Well, I personally think that I don't want to enter mainstream politics until Muntu becomes president and makes me governor of the central bank, so that I can control the cash.
Don't make promises here which you will not be able to fulfill.
He's the kind of guy who can do something like that.
I will not refuse the job of governor of the central bank.
No, but if you are going to give us support, it must be out of the desire to see this country go in the right direction, not giving any terms prior.
So I've been knocked out on my last comment. You can ask his.
What's going to be your parting shot, General Muntu?
I would like to thank you for hosting us tonight and to communicate the Ugandans. We shouldn't lose hope. There's nothing impossible under the sun. The worst thing for us is to give up because of the state of hopelessness created by design by the regime. We can't afford to lose hope. We can't afford to think that it is impossible to throw this regime out of power through an electoral process, or whichever other direction any other group chooses to take. Concentrate on organizing around it until we are able to take power. And we need to have simultaneously organized ourselves, whichever group takes power, to manage it different from how it has been managed hitherto.
All right. General Mugisha Muntu, thank you so much. Mr. Andrew Mwenda, thank you so much for your submissions. I suppose these are some of the distinguished sons of Uganda sharing. I'm sure you have picked a thing or two. And this brings us to the end of tonight's edition of On the Spot. Join us again next week. Good night, and God bless Uganda.
Okay. Now.